4 grown male lions charged through the red dust toward an old female elephant lying helpless in a dry wash. The rescue team raised tranquilizer rifles. A deputy stood ready to fire because everyone believed the next moment would turn bloody. But Maggie, the aging elephant, did not panic. Her tired ears only moved slightly, as if she recognized children she had lost years ago. And when the largest lion lowered his head beside her trunk, what happened next left everyone frozen. The morning after the sandstorm, Painted Mesa Wildlife Sanctuary looked as if the desert had tried to bury it alive. Red dust clung to the fences, the roofs, the water troughs, and the tired backs of every rescue truck parked along the service road. In the old elephant yard, Maggie moved through the haze slowly, her gray skin powdered orange by the New Mexico wind. She was an Asian elephant, small for the stories people told about her, but still enormous beside any human who stood near her gate. Her ears were torn at the edges, her left eye clouded with age, and a pale scar circled one ankle where a circus chain had once eaten into her skin. Most mornings, Maggie walked carefully, as if every step carried both pain and memory. Grace Walker saw her first from the clinic porch. Maggie had left the shelter before sunrise. Following a broken line of fence, the storm had bent inward during the night. Grace called her name softly, not wanting to startle her. Maggie lifted her trunk, tasted the dry air, then continued toward the low wash beyond the elephant yard, where rainwater sometimes gathered after rare desert storms. There was no water in the wash that morning, only cracked clay, broken mesquite branches, and a narrow trench hidden beneath drifted sand. Maggie's front foot slipped before anyone could reach her. Her great body leaned, fought for balance, then sank sideways with a heavy, helpless thud that sent dust rolling across the ground like smoke from a small explosion. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the sanctuary woke all at once. Grace shouted for Dr. Noah Brooks. Lily Carter came running from the feed shed, still pulling on her gloves. Ethan Reed, the former firefighter who handled emergency response, drove the rescue truck hard across the yard, its tires skidding in the loose red sand. Maggie was alive, but she could not stand. Her ribs rose and fell in slow, shallow waves. She pressed her trunk against the ground, trying once to push herself upright, then stopped, too tired to fight the weight of her own body. Grace knelt near the rim of the wash, keeping her voice low. "Easy, girl. We're here. We're not leaving you." Noah slid down beside her with a medical bag, careful to stay clear of her legs. He checked her breathing, her gums, the pulse behind her ear. Maggie's cloudy eye turned toward him, not frightened, not angry, just deeply worn. Lily stood above them, gripping the rail of the truck, and for a moment, she looked less like a trained animal care specialist than the teenager who had once cried over this elephant every night. Ethan began giving orders. Straps, winch, sedation kit ready, but not used unless necessary. A county deputy who had arrived after the storm watched from the outer road, one hand resting uneasily near his sidearm. Painted Mesa had handled injured animals before, but a fallen elephant was never simple. A fallen elephant near the new Big Cat expansion was something else entirely. The first alarm came from the security tablet in Lily's hand. At first, she thought the camera had been shaken loose by the storm. The screen blurred with dust, then sharpened. 4 dark shapes were moving beyond the damaged perimeter gate, low and fast through the copper grass. Lily's face drained of color before she could speak. Ethan saw the screen and went still. "Lions," he said. The word changed the air around them. The deputy lifted his rifle. Ethan grabbed the tranquilizer gun from the truck. but his eyes were hard with the kind of fear that came from knowing how quickly a rescue could become a slaughter. 4 adult male lions were running straight toward the wash. Grace stood at the edge of Maggie's trench, her hands open, her voice catching between command and prayer. Nobody fires unless I say so. But even she could not make the scene look harmless. The lions came through the dust like a storm with teeth, their manes dark against the pale morning, their shoulders rolling with terrible power. Maggie heard them before she saw them. Her ears, weak and dusty, lifted a few inches from her head. The old elephant did not thrash. She did not trumpet. She did not try to drag herself away from the sound of 4 predators closing in. Instead, something softened in her face, as if a door had opened somewhere far behind her tired eyes. The first lion reached the rim of the wash and stopped so suddenly that sand slid beneath his paws. The others spread around him, forming a rough half-circle above the fallen elephant. Ethan raised the tranquilizer rifle. The deputy raised his weapon higher. Lily whispered, "Oh, God!" because the largest lion had started down the slope toward Maggie's face. He moved slowly now, not like a hunter finishing a chase, but like something pulled by a memory too old to understand. Maggie's trunk lay across the cracked earth, too heavy for her to lift. The lion lowered his massive head until his jaws were only inches from her skin. Everyone waited for the bite. Maggie only closed her cloudy eye and breathed. 8 years before that lion lowered his head beside Maggie's fallen body, Painted Mesa was a quieter place. The elephant yard had only 2 shade roofs, 1 rusted water tank, and a row of cottonwoods that fought hard to stay green in the desert wind. Maggie had already been old then, but there was still steadiness in her walk, a slow dignity that made people lower their voices around her. She spent most evenings near the east fence, where the sun slipped behind the red mesas and turned the sand the color of warm copper. Grace Walker often said Maggie listened better than any animal she had ever known. The old Asian elephant could hear a nervous truck engine, a broken latch, or a keeper crying in the feed room long before anyone else noticed something was wrong. That September night began with a wall of dust rolling across the highway from Arizona. Wind slammed against the sanctuary buildings until the clinic windows trembled in their frames. Maggie stood beneath her shelter, her trunk curled loosely against her chest, while thunder flickered far away without rain. She was calm, but not resting. Something in the storm had made her restless. Just after midnight, the call came in from New Mexico State Police. A livestock trailer had overturned 20 miles west of the sanctuary, near a dry stretch of 2-lane road where smugglers sometimes moved animals after dark. The driver had fled into the storm. What he left behind was a locked steel crate, 4 broken water bowls, and a sound no one on scene could bear to hear. Grace arrived with Dr. Noah Brooks and 2 rescue techs. Headlights cut through dust so thick it looked like dirty fog. Inside the trailer, hidden beneath torn tarps and cheap rope, were 4 lion cubs, no bigger than farm dogs. Their eyes were wide with fever and fear. Their paws were raw from clawing at the crate. Their mother was gone, and no one had to say what that meant. The cubs were brought to Painted Mesa before dawn, wrapped in emergency blankets and carried through the quarantine doors one at a time. Duke, the largest, fought until his tiny body shook. Cooper snapped at every hand that came near. Finn cried with a low, hoarse sound that seemed too tired for anger. Sam, the smallest, barely moved at all. Maggie heard them from across the yard. She had been standing in the dark near her gate, facing the clinic long before the rescue van returned. When the first cub cried, her whole body changed. Her ears lifted, her trunk stretched forward. A low rumble stirred inside her chest, so deep it traveled through the ground before it reached the air. Noah did not want the elephant anywhere near quarantine. He was a careful man, trained to trust walls, locks, and distance. 4 traumatized lion cubs were dangerous even when they were small, and Maggie was too old to risk a panic. But Maggie began tapping the steel gate with the tip of her trunk again and again. Soft at first, then harder, like someone knocking on a door no one would open. Inside the clinic, Sam was slipping away. He would not take the bottle. He would not swallow the formula Lily warmed against her own wrist. His breathing came in little jerks, and his body felt too light under the blanket. Grace watched Noah check his gums, then saw the look he tried to hide. If the cub did not drink soon, morning might come without him. Then the floor trembled, not from thunder, not from trucks, but from Maggie. She had moved as close as the elephant yard allowed, standing at the fence outside the clinic wall, her trunk raised toward the small barred window. She rumbled again, lower this time, a sound almost too gentle for something so large. The crying inside the clinic weakened, then stopped. Grace noticed it first. Sam's paws, which had been twitching against the towel, grew still. Duke stopped growling. Cooper's mouth stayed open, but no warning came out. Finn pressed his nose to the crate bars and listened. Noah looked from the cubs to the wall, then back again, as if the science in his head had suddenly met something older than science. Against Noah's judgment, Grace opened the service door just wide enough for sound to pass through. Maggie did not rush forward. She did not swing her trunk or crowd the doorway. She only stood in the storm-washed dark and let that deep, patient rumble roll from her chest into the clinic. Lily lifted the bottle to Sam's mouth one more time. This time, Sam swallowed. It was small, almost nothing, just one weak pull of milk, then another. But in that room, it felt like a miracle learning how to breathe. Maggie stayed outside the door until the sun came up, dust settling on her back, her old eyes fixed on a place she could not see. By morning, everyone at Painted Mesa knew the truth. The cubs had arrived without a mother, and Maggie had heard them anyway. By the second sunrise, the storm had passed, but the fear it carried had stayed inside the quarantine room. The 4 cubs lay in separate crates now, not because anyone wanted them apart, but because they had scratched and bitten at every hand that tried to help. Maggie stood outside in the pale morning light, facing the clinic wall, as if she had been waiting there all her life. Grace watched from the doorway with a cup of coffee gone cold in her hands. She had run rescues for 20 years, and she had seen grief wear many faces. Dogs mourned at empty kennels. Horses stopped eating after losing a pasture mate. But she had never seen an elephant stand through an entire night for animals that should have meant nothing to her. Noah wanted distance. He said it gently, but firmly, the way doctors speak when compassion must answer to danger. The cubs were wild, sick, and terrified. Maggie was old, half blind, and too valuable to risk in an accident. One wrong sound, one slammed door, one frightened lunge from either side, and a miracle could turn into a tragedy before anyone had time to breathe. Still, Sam would not drink unless Maggie was near. Every attempt ended the same way. Lily warmed the bottle, whispered to him, changed the nipple, tried goat milk, formula, even a dropper. Sam turned his face away each time, his little body folding inward as if the world had become too heavy. Then Maggie rumbled outside, and his ears twitched toward the sound. Grace made the decision just before noon. She ordered the team to move the cubs into the larger quarantine bay, the only room with a reinforced viewing panel thick enough to stop teeth, claws, or panic. Noah stared at her for a long second, then said nothing. He only checked the locks twice and stood close enough to intervene if the impossible stopped being gentle. Maggie was led along the clinic wall by Ethan and two keepers, though no one really led her. She followed the sound of the cubs with a patience that made the humans look clumsy. When she reached the glass, she stopped. Her trunk rose slowly, trembling at the tip, then settled against the clear barrier between her and the 4 trembling lives inside. At first, the cubs reacted like sparks thrown into dry grass. Cooper snapped and backed into the corner. Duke planted himself in front of the others, tiny legs stiff, eyes burning with fear too old for his face. Finn cried once, then lowered his head. Sam lay under a towel near the heater, so still that Lily pressed a hand to her mouth. Then Maggie breathed against the glass. A soft fog bloomed beneath her trunk. Her rumble came next, deep and steady, moving through the floor more than the air. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was the kind of sound a heart might make if it were big enough to shelter everything broken around it. Duke heard it first. His ears shifted forward, and the growl in his throat faded. Finn lifted his nose from the blanket. Cooper stopped chewing the corner of the towel and stared, confused by a comfort he did not trust. Sam opened his eyes. Last. They were dull, fevered, and lost, but they fixed on the place where Maggie's trunk touched the glass. Lily crawled closer with the bottle, slow as prayer. Sam did not move at first. Maggie tapped the glass once, so lightly the sound was almost imagined. Sam pulled himself forward, belly dragging over the towel, until his tiny head rested beneath Maggie's shadow on the other side. When Lily touched the bottle to his mouth, he drank. No one cheered. No one dared disturb the fragile thing unfolding in front of them. Grace lowered her eyes, breathing through the ache in her chest. Noah watched the cub swallow again and again, his face caught between science and surrender. Outside the glass, Maggie closed her cloudy eye, as if the weight she had carried for years had finally found somewhere to go. After that, the routine changed. Medicine still came from Noah. Food still came from Lily. Clean bedding, warm lamps, and careful hands still came from the staff. But calm came from Maggie. Each feeding began with her standing behind the glass, one scarred foot resting forward, her trunk pressed gently to the same place until the cubs believed the room was safe. Days softened into weeks. Duke learned to sit closest to the glass without growling. Finn slept with his back against the panel whenever Maggie was near. Cooper never fully stopped watching the door, but even he began to lower his head when Maggie rumbled. Sam became her shadow through the barrier, pressing his face to the glass wherever her trunk appeared. Late one evening, Lily filmed Sam making that small, raspy sound against the glass, while Maggie answered with a rumble so low the water in a nearby bowl trembled. She saved the clip under a simple name, The Elephant Who Calmed the Lions. By morning, everyone at Painted Mesa understood that Maggie had not adopted them with milk or meat. She had adopted them with presence. Spring came softly to Painted Mesa, with pale wild flowers pushing through the red sand and warm wind moving along the clinic walls. The 4 cubs were no longer the shaking little bodies that had arrived in crates. They had weight now, voices now, and paws too large for their own balance. Yet every morning, Maggie still waited behind the glass. Duke grew into his name first. He was not the loudest, and he was not the biggest for long, but he watched everything with a stillness that made even Noah pause. When the keepers entered, Duke placed himself between them and his brothers. When Maggie rumbled, he sat close to the glass, calm and proud, as though he understood she had given him his first safe place. Cooper was different. He carried lightning under his skin, a dropped bucket, a truck door slamming, a raven landing on the roof could send him spinning toward the sound with teeth bared and claws out. Maggie never scolded him. She only lowered her trunk to the glass and rumbled until his breathing slowed, as if she were teaching him that not every shadow had come to hurt him. Finn became the heavy one, broad in the chest and sweet in the eyes. He liked to sleep with his flank pressed against the viewing panel, close enough that Maggie's trunk could rest opposite his shoulder. Lily said Finn looked like a lion who had been born with an old dog's heart. When he dreamed, his paws twitched, and Maggie stood over him like a gray mountain guarding a child. Sam remained the smallest, though no one called him weak anymore. He had survived the night no one thought he would see, and that survival made every breath feel precious. He followed Maggie through the glass with a devotion that made visitors fall silent. If she moved left, he moved left. If she lifted her trunk, he lifted his little chin to meet it. By the end of that year, the story of Maggie and the cubs had traveled farther than Grace expected. Donors sent letters. School children mailed crayon drawings of a gray elephant beside 4 golden lions. People called them a miracle family. Painted Mesa needed that hope, and for a while, everyone wanted to believe love had solved what nature never intended to explain. But lions do not stay cubs because people love them. Their soft cries deepened into rolling calls that shook the walls at feeding time. Their playful swats grew strong enough to crack enrichment barrels. Cooper's games changed first. He no longer only chased balls or tugged ropes. He crouched low in the grass, shoulders rippling, eyes locked on anything that moved. Maggie noticed before the humans admitted it. She watched Cooper from her side of the fence with her trunk held still in the air. There was no fear in her old face, only a sadness that seemed to know what was coming. The babies she had calmed with a rumble were becoming what they had always been meant to be: beautiful, powerful, dangerous. The first real warning came on a dry afternoon when a young calf from Cal Porter's ranch slipped through a broken outer wire near the sanctuary boundary. The calf wandered close to the big cat fence, bawling for its mother. Cooper saw it from the grass. His body lowered. His tail went still. Then he sprang toward the fence with a force that made the metal scream. He never touched the calf, but he did not have to. The little animal panicked, twisted sideways, and caught its back leg in a strand of old barbed wire near the service road. By the time Ethan reached it, blood had darkened the dust around its hoof. Cal Porter arrived 10 minutes later in a white pickup, his face hard with anger and fear. Cal had given money to Painted Mesa for years, but that day his voice carried across the whole yard. He said the sanctuary had lost control. He said lions did not belong near ranches, near homes, near children on school buses. Grace tried to explain the fence held, that Cooper had not escaped, that the calf's injury was an accident. Cal only pointed toward the lion yard and said accidents were how tragedies began. By evening, a local news van was parked outside the gate. The headline was cruel before the facts were clear. 4 lions raised beside an elephant now threatened nearby livestock. Lily stood in the feed room, watching the broadcast with tears in her eyes. Behind her, Maggie pressed her trunk against the familiar glass. But Sam was on the other side, pacing in confusion as cameras flashed beyond the fence. Noah found Grace near the clinic after dark. He looked older than he had that morning. For once, he did not speak like a man trying to win an argument. He spoke like a man who hated the truth he carried. "Maggie can love them," he said quietly, "but she can't teach them how to be lions." Grace closed her eyes because she knew he was right. The county decision came before the weekend. Duke, Cooper, Finn, and Sam would be transferred to Cedar Ridge Big Cat Reserve in Colorado, where the fences were higher and the enclosures wider. Maggie stood through the night beneath a moon blurred by dust, facing the lion yard without eating. On the other side, 4 young lions listened for her rumble, not knowing the world had already begun pulling them away. The next morning arrived with a strange, fragile peace. Painted Mesa sat under a pale blue sky, and for a few hours, the world pretended nothing had changed. The transfer crates waited beside the big cat yard, clean and empty. Maggie stood near the glass, watching Duke, Cooper, Finn, and Sam move through the enclosure as if her stillness alone could keep the day from coming. Grace had barely slept. She walked at the fence line with a clipboard she could not focus on, stopping every few minutes to look toward Maggie. Noah checked the sedation doses twice, then checked them again. Ethan inspected the transport ramp, his jaw tight. Everyone had a job, but nobody moved with confidence. The sanctuary felt like a house preparing to lose its children. By noon, the wind shifted. It came from the west, hot and sharp, carrying a smell that made Ethan lift his head before the radios crackled. A lightning strike had hit dry cedar scrub beyond the ridge. At first, it was only smoke, a thin brown smear above the desert. Then the wind found it, fed it, and turned that smear into a rising wall. The Cedar Ridge fire moved faster than anyone expected. Sirens cut across the sanctuary. Keepers ran from yard to yard, loading smaller animals first, clearing the clinic, dragging hoses across the dust. Ash began to fall like dirty snow. Maggie stood beneath her shade roof, ears spread, listening not to the fire, but to the 4 young lions roaring from the big cat yard. Ethan brought the elephant transport forward and ordered the ramp down. Maggie was supposed to go first. She was too old, too heavy, too difficult to move once smoke filled the grounds. But when the keepers urged her toward the truck, she planted her scarred feet in the dirt. Her trunk lifted toward the lion yard, and a low rumble rolled out of her chest. Grace stepped in front of the team. "Wait!" Ethan turned on her, sweat and ash streaking his face. "We don't have time for this!" Behind them, Cooper slammed against the inner fence. Duke roared from the smoke. Finn paced in circles, and Sam cried with that small, broken sound Maggie had known since the first night. The old elephant answered him. A power line snapped somewhere near the service road, and half the sanctuary lights died. The main gate to the big cat transfer chute jammed, its motor grinding uselessly in the heat. Noah looked at Grace with dread in his eyes. The lions could not be loaded from the front. If the fire reached the dry grass behind their yard, the enclosure would become a trap. Then Maggie moved, not toward the safety of the truck, but toward the side fence behind the clinic. Ethan shouted for the keepers to stop her, but Grace saw what Maggie had seen. Beyond the warped panel was an old service path, unused for years, running down toward the canyon wash. Heat had loosened the posts. Maggie pressed her forehead to the metal and pushed. The first post bent with a scream. The second tore free from the baked earth. Maggie shoved again, her old body trembling from the effort, until a gap opened wide enough for the rescue team to pull the emergency gates into place. Smoke rolled over the yard. Grace realized Maggie was not panicking. She was showing them the only road the fire had not yet swallowed. The young lions were driven through the opening with shields, noise boards, and Maggie's rumble guiding them from the other side. Duke went first, eyes fixed on the gray shape beyond the smoke. Finn followed, coughing hard. Cooper fought the handlers until Maggie turned her head and rumbled once, deep and firm. Sam stayed closest to her, his shoulder nearly brushing the fence. They reached the canyon wash as the sky turned copper black. The old service bridge at the far end was gone, burned through and collapsed into the ravine. Behind them, flames chewed through the scrub, closing the path they had just taken. Ethan found one chance left: the cable rescue cage used for moving injured predators across the wash. It could carry the lions, but not Maggie. The team opened the steel cage and tried to move the brothers inside. Duke hesitated. Finn backed away. Cooper snarled at the metal walls. Sam refused completely, pressing himself against Maggie's front leg, trembling beneath her chest like he had done as a cub behind the glass. He did not understand rescue. He only understood that his mother was not coming with him. Maggie understood more than anyone wanted her to. If the lions stayed beside her, they would die. If they entered the cage, they would live. But they would believe she had abandoned them. The old elephant stepped back from Sam. He followed. She stepped back again. Then, with a sound that tore through the smoke, Maggie trumpeted with a fury no one had ever heard from her. The brothers froze. Maggie slammed one foot into the dust, throwing grit toward them. She swung her trunk against the cage door, hard enough to make the steel ring like thunder. Cooper stumbled backward inside. Finn followed in panic. Duke turned last, confused and wounded. Sam still tried to reach her, until Maggie shoved the gate closed between them. As the cable lifted the cage away from the burning wash, Sam pressed his face between the bars and cried for her. Maggie stood below in the ash, breathing hard, her trunk hanging low, her whole body shaking with the cost of what she had done. Then she gave one final rumble, soft and broken, the same sound that had once taught 4 motherless cubs to live. The months after the fire passed without asking permission from anyone's grief. Painted Mesa rebuilt its fences, repainted its gates, and cleared the blackened cedar from the old service road. But near the big cat yard, Maggie still stopped at the empty glass each evening, resting her trunk against the place where 4 young lions had once pressed their faces back. The transfer had saved them, everyone said. Cedar Ridge Big Cat Reserve in Colorado had taller walls, wider runs, medical staff trained for adult predators, and acres of pine-edged canyon where lions could grow into themselves. Grace repeated those facts often. Noah did too. But facts did not change the way Maggie listened after sunset, waiting for voices that no longer came. At first, Lily sent videos every week from Cedar Ridge. Duke learned the new yard slowly, circling the fence, line before allowing his brothers to rest. Finn adapted with gentle curiosity, rolling in pine needles and stretching his broad body beneath the mountain sun. Cooper tested every gate, every lock, every shadow. Sam stayed quiet, watching the road as if Maggie might still appear. Years began to gather around them. The cubs became young lions, and then something larger, darker, harder to look at without feeling a little afraid. Their manes thickened. Their shoulders widened. Their playful swats became impacts that shook steel posts. The staff at Cedar Ridge started calling them the Mesa Brothers, not because they were born together, but because they moved like one body. Duke became the center of the coalition, calm in a way that made other lions hesitate. Cooper became muscle and thunder, always first to challenge anything that came too close. Finn grew into a massive, steady guardian, more patient than the others, but impossible to move when he chose to stand. Sam, once the smallest, carried a dark mane and a scar across his muzzle. That scar came during a winter fight with an older male from a neighboring enclosure. The other lion charged Duke through a transfer gate mistake, and Sam threw himself between them without waiting. By the time the keepers separated the animals, Sam was bleeding, Duke was alive, and Cooper was roaring so hard the valley answered. The weak one had become the one who would not retreat. Lily was working at Cedar Ridge by then, no longer the girl with shaking hands and a phone full of rescue clips. She had become an animal behavior specialist, careful, observant, and still unable to hear a low elephant rumble without feeling her throat tighten. In a protected folder on her laptop, she kept the old recordings from Painted Mesa, including Maggie's final rumble beneath the smoke. One quiet afternoon, during a sound response study, Lily played that recording through a small speaker outside the lion habitat. She expected curiosity, maybe irritation, maybe nothing at all. The first note rolled across the enclosure, deep and soft, almost too low for human ears. Duke lifted his head. Finn stopped walking. Cooper's tail went still. Sam reacted last, but his reaction broke everyone in the observation room. He rose from the shade and walked toward the speaker with slow, careful steps, not stalking, not hunting. His ears softened, his scarred face lowered. Then he made a small, raspy sound, so faint and strange that Lily remembered the quarantine glass before she remembered to breathe. It was the same sound he had made as a starving cub, the same broken little plea that had pulled Maggie to the clinic wall. The grown lion stood over the speaker, eyes half closed, as if the sound had opened a door inside him. Behind him, Duke, Cooper, and Finn gathered close, all four massive bodies suddenly quiet under a memory no fence had erased. Lily sent the video to Grace that night. At Painted Mesa, Grace watched it beside Maggie's yard, holding the phone with both hands. The old elephant stood nearby, her body heavier now, her left eye almost fully clouded. When the recording played from the phone, Maggie's trunk lifted slightly. Not high, not strong, just enough to show that some part of her still knew. Age had settled into Maggie like winter settling into an old house. Her steps were shorter. Her ankles ached when cold desert mornings arrived. The scar from the circus chain had grown pale and smooth, but the pain beneath it had not disappeared. She no longer walked the full fence line. Most days she stayed near the shade roof, facing west when the evening wind came. Painted Mesa was changing too. The fire damage, the drought, and the cost of keeping elderly animals safe had forced Grace into a partnership with Cedar Ridge. The two sanctuaries would merge land, staff, and resources, linking the old elephant grounds with the expanded Big Cat Reserve through a reinforced corridor. On paper, it was practical. To Grace, it felt like fate moving quietly. No one told Maggie that the world was bending back toward the 4 sons she had lost. No one could explain maps or permits or construction gates to an elephant who understood only voices, sense, and absence. But on the first evening, workers opened the far western fence line. Maggie lifted her trunk toward the wind. Somewhere beyond the dust, something familiar was waiting. The night the gate broke, Painted Mesa was wrapped in a wind so dry it seemed to scrape the paint from the buildings. Sand moved across the service roads in thin red sheets, covering tire tracks almost as soon as trucks made them. Maggie stood beneath her shade roof, swaying gently, her trunk lifted toward the western fence where construction lights blinked through the dust. She had been restless since sunset. Grace noticed it during the evening check, the way Maggie kept turning her head toward the new corridor, ears opening and closing, as if she were listening to something too far away for human hearing. Noah said old elephants sometimes grew uneasy when weather changed. Lily said nothing, because she had seen Maggie listen like that before. Near midnight, the storm pushed harder. A loose panel slammed against a post behind the storage barn. Then the power flickered, came back, and died again for 3 long seconds. In those 3 seconds, the old western gate, weakened by weeks of construction and packed sand in its hinges, gave one low metallic groan and folded inward. The alarm should have screamed through every building. It did not. Sand had packed itself into the control box, choking the sensor before it could wake the night crew. The only sound was wind, sheet metal, and Maggie's slow breathing. She stepped out from beneath her shelter, her cloudy eyes searching the dark, drawn forward by a scent she had not touched in years. Maggie moved through the opened corridor with the careful trust of an animal following memory more than sight. The world around her was no longer clear. Fences blurred into shadows. Road lights became soft yellow moons. She did not know she had crossed out of the elephant yard. She only knew the wind carried something familiar, something warm beneath the dust. The dry wash waited beyond a low rise, hidden by sand that had drifted smooth over its edge. Maggie's front foot slid first. Her body tried to correct, but age answered too slowly. One knee buckled, then the other. She went down hard into the trench, the impact rolling through the ground like distant thunder. For a moment, even the wind seemed to stop. She lay on her side beneath the pale emergency lights, breathing in slow, shallow pulls. Her trunk dragged over the cracked clay, searching for leverage that was not there. Once, she tried to lift her head, but the effort shuddered through her whole body and faded. The old circus scar around her ankle showed white through the dust. Grace found her just before dawn. The missing gate had finally triggered a delayed alert, and the rescue crew arrived in a rush of headlights and shouted orders. Lily ran ahead of the truck and dropped to her knees at the rim of the wash. "Maggie," she whispered, and the old elephant's ear moved once, small and tired, but still answering. Noah slid down carefully with his medical bag, checking her breathing, while Grace kept one hand pressed to the dirt near Maggie's face. Ethan brought the winch truck around and ordered straps laid out beside the trench. The plan was difficult, but possible. Sedate only if needed. Secure the belly sling. Lift slow. Keep her calm. Keep everyone calm. Then the radio cracked. A guard from the Big Cat expansion was yelling over the wind. 4 lions had passed through the same broken gate. Not cubs, not young males. The Mesa brothers. They were moving fast across the open corridor, and every camera they crossed showed the same thing. Duke, Cooper, Finn, and Sam were running directly toward Maggie. The change in the rescue team was instant. Ethan reached for the tranquilizer rifle. A county deputy who had come for storm support lifted a real weapon from his truck. Grace shouted for them to hold, but fear had already entered the wash. From the ridge, 4 dark-maned shapes appeared through the blowing dust, powerful and low, their bodies cutting through the morning like a hunting wave. Maggie heard them before the others saw their faces. Her trunk, limp against the dirt, twitched at the tip. Her cloudy eye opened halfway. She did not panic. She did not try to rise. She only breathed out, long and trembling, as if some lonely part of her had finally recognized the sound it had been waiting for. The lions reached the rim one by one. Cooper came in hard, snarling at the humans near the trench. Finn swung wide to the left, huge and silent. Duke stopped above Maggie's back, his dark mane lifting in the wind. Sam came last, slower than the others, his scarred muzzle pointed toward the old elephant's face. Ethan raised the tranquilizer rifle and sighted down the barrel. The deputy's finger tightened near his trigger. Grace stood between them in the wash, her voice breaking as she said, "Do not fire." But Sam was already descending. He stepped close to Maggie's trunk, lowered his massive head, and opened his jaws just inches from her skin. The whole wash seemed to hold its breath. Sam's jaws hovered beside Maggie's trunk, close enough for everyone above the trench to see the curve of his teeth. Ethan's rifle followed him. The deputy's shoulder tightened behind the real gun. Maggie lay still in the red dust, too weak to move, her cloudy eye half closed as the lion lowered his scarred face to hers. Then Sam did not bite. He closed his mouth, shut his golden eyes, and pressed the side of his massive head against Maggie's trunk with a gentleness that made the moment feel unreal. From deep in his throat came a small, broken sound, low and raspy, nothing like a roar. It was the same helpless cry he had made as a cub behind the clinic glass. Maggie's breath changed. It came shallow and rough, but something in it softened. The tip of her trunk trembled against the ground, then lifted barely an inch. Sam stayed perfectly still, as if he knew the effort cost her more than anyone could see. When her trunk touched the dark hair of his mane, his whole body lowered, huge and powerful, yet suddenly childlike. Grace covered her mouth with both hands. Lily began to cry before she knew she was crying. Noah stared down into the wash with his medical bag forgotten beside him. Ethan did not lower the rifle at first because training held him there, frozen between fear and wonder. But his finger moved away from the trigger. Even he could see this was not an attack. Duke stepped down next, slow and deliberate. He did not approach Maggie's face. Instead, he turned outward, placing his body between the fallen elephant and the open desert. Finn moved to the left ridge, broad shoulders blocking the lower path. Cooper, still bristling with tension, faced the humans for one terrifying second before turning toward the wind. That was when Lily heard the barking. Not domestic dogs from the ranch houses, but a rougher, wilder chorus rolling up from the abandoned grazing land beyond the wash. A pack of feral dogs had caught the scent of Maggie's blood and weakness. Thin, desperate, and emboldened by hunger, they slipped through the mesquite like shadows with ribs. The rescue crew backed up in alarm. The dogs fanned out along the far bank, snapping and pacing, not brave enough to rush the lions, but hungry enough to test the circle. Maggie's ear twitched at the sound. Sam lifted his head from her trunk, and the tenderness vanished from his face. In one movement, the orphaned cub was gone, replaced by a king. Duke roared first. The sound hit the wash like thunder rolling under stone. Finn answered, then Cooper, then Sam, until the four voices became one wall of warning. The dogs scattered backward, tails low, their courage broken before a single paw struck. Dust rose around the lions as they stood over Maggie, not hunting, not feeding, but guarding. Grace understood the message before anyone spoke it. They were not surrounding Maggie as prey. They were surrounding her as family. The same living wall Maggie had once made with her own body had returned in another form, made of dark manes, scarred faces, and teeth that now faced away from her. The old elephant had protected them when they were helpless. Now they were protecting her. Noah moved first, carefully sliding down with the sling strap in his hand. "Slow," Grace whispered, though she was not sure whether she was speaking to Noah, the lions, or her own heart. Sam watched him with burning eyes. Maggie gave a faint rumble, fragile as distant thunder. At that sound, Sam stepped back half a pace, and the others held their line. The rescue took nearly an hour. Every buckle, every strap, every movement had to be careful. Ethan guided the winch with hands that shook only once. Lily stood near Maggie's head, playing the old recording of a rumble from a small speaker, though Maggie herself was still breathing the real sound into the dust. The lions listened. The humans worked. No one wasted the miracle. When the sling finally lifted Maggie from the wash, her body rose slowly, wrapped in canvas and sunlight. Sam walked beneath the edge of the shadow until Ethan warned him back, with a quiet voice. He obeyed only when Maggie's trunk brushed the air toward him. The old elephant could not stand yet, but she was no longer alone on the ground. Maggie lived 3 more days in the recovery barn. Grace received special permission to keep the Mesa brothers in the separated holding yard beside her stall. Through the reinforced bars, Sam lay closest, his scarred muzzle pressed to the same place where Maggie's trunk rested. Duke, Cooper, and Finn stayed behind him, silent sentries beneath the soft hum of the barn lights. On the final morning, Painted Mesa was calm. No wind, no alarms, no dust moving across the road. Maggie opened her cloudy eye as the sun touched the barn wall, and Sam made that small sound again, the one that had crossed 8 years, fire, fear, and distance to find her. Maggie lifted her trunk one last time and touched the bars where his face waited. Then she rested, knowing her children had remembered. And now I want to ask you something from the heart. If you believe those lions remembered the mother who saved them, comment 1 below. If you think the wild should never cross the line between predator and prey, comment 0. I read your comments, and I'd love to know what this story made you feel. And if Maggie's story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel. More powerful animal stories are coming. Stories of loyalty, sacrifice, survival, and the kind of love the world never expects. Stay with us, because the next story may move you even more.